Thank you, Bobby and Etienne. Let's give them a one. That was awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel lifted higher and higher. Yes. Power of music, right? Get that heart energy going. So that's what it's all about. Upliftment. That's what religion is about, ultimately. It's about upliftment. And the Sanskrit word for God is Satchidananda, conscious eternal bliss. How many of you like feeling bliss? Yeah. How many of you like to live in that joy as much as possible? That's called prosperity, isn't it? Abundance. That's what God is, joy. He said, I've come that my joy might be in you and that your joy might be full. That was the message of Jesus. Not old downcast. Oh, he died for me. And, he did in one sense. He knew that if he spoke the truth, he would be crucified. But that wasn't his message. His message wasn't, look how great I am. His message is, discover and remember how great you are. His message was, know the truth and the truth will make you free. That was the message of Jesus. That's what unity's focus is. That's what the yogi's focus is. That's what the Buddhist focus is. That's what the Taoist focus is, that the universe, the infinite presence of God is expressing in and through and as you. That's what we're here to discover and to know. Not that we're these limited little human beings caught in this little body with aches and pains, and how am I going to pay the bills, and how am I going to get love, and where am I going to get fulfillment, and how am I going to be happy. We're not destined to live in that limited way, are we? Jesus came and said, all that the Father has is mine. All that the Father has is mine. The works that I do, you can do, and even greater. Wow. And we're still discovering that, aren't we? Yes. We're still learning that message. I know I am. It's been a journey. When I graduated high school, I went to college, and I was going to go into television. Instead, I got involved in radio. I did radio in college, was an announcer. And then, because of the challenges I was going through, emotionally, what's the purpose of life? Who am I? What am I going to do with my life? I started to seek, I started to discover spirituality. And I started to, even though I was studying going to TV, I was studying communication, interpersonal communication. I got interested in spiritual stuff. So I started to study religion and philosophy. Is this really the truth, that God is within me? Is what unity's teaching true? Is what I'm learning from the yogis true? I started to study religion and philosophy, theologians and so on. And when I graduated, I still wasn't quite sure, what am I going to do? I was interested in sports psychology also, because your thoughts influence your performance. So I wanted to study that, and maybe I'd be a sports psychologist. So I interviewed with a man now who is a world-famous sports psychologist. At the time, he was little known, and sports psychology was little known. And I had an interview with him. The problem is he forgot my application. He left it out on the golf course or something. And I told him I wanted to be a unity minister, and I wanted to also study sports psychology so that I could teach high school people and others how to apply the mind to performance. And he said, Justin, the guys on my golf team that I coach, the ones who try to bring God into their golf, they believe if they play well, it's God's will. If they play bad, it's God's will. And they never get any better. So that interview didn't go very well. And I thought, well, maybe multicultural counseling. I applied to Columbia University. I don't know why I did, because the fees there were so high. I went to my Unity minister and I said, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. She said, Justin, I think the handwriting is on the wall. You should apply to Unity School for Religious Studies. So I did. And I got in and went through the program. It was just like advanced what I studied in college, just on a different level. Religion, philosophy, communication. And I got invited to be an assistant minister in Kansas City during my school. The second year I was in a church, and while I was in school, I picked up a book on the dollar bookshelf about Yogananda's teachings. And so I got interested in that. You see, I went to ministerial school not because I really wanted to be a minister. I went because I wanted answers to my spiritual questions. I wanted a higher education on my spirituality. That's really why I went. And then when I went through the program, I thought, well, yeah, being a minister, I love to speak. I'd love to read spiritually and grow spiritually. Sure, that sounds like a good thing to do. And after going through the school, I realized, there's a lot more to being a minister than learning and speaking. There's administration, there's leadership, there's pastoral stuff, there's dealing with personalities, there's being a manager, being a marketer. There's all kinds of stuff involved in it. I don't know if I want to do this yet. So the guy I was working with, the minister, Reverend Dr. Hilbert, he asked me if I wanted to be his associate in Kansas City, and it didn't feel right. And I wasn't sure I wanted to launch out on my own, so I went back to Virginia Beach and was an assistant with Joyce Kramer for a year and a half. And let me see what ministry is like. Now, I'm sharing my story because it's related to Ruth, the first Millionaires, who you'll see, she gathered her good bit by bit. And that's what we all have to do, gather our good bit by bit. So I went to work with Joyce Kramer, but I was still studying Yogananda's teachings because I felt like he understood the next level for me spiritually. And I went to Joyce and I said, Joyce, I think I want to go and live at Ananda Village in Northern California because I want to learn more about Yogananda's teachings, and I want to be in a community of people who are dedicated to that. And I thought that I was saying goodbye to my Unity minister career at that point, because Joyce Kramer was very conservative in her Unity understanding. She was all about Jesus Christ. You didn't really heard Eastern stuff from her, and she was all about the Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. So I kind of felt like I was, maybe Unity minister I was saying bye-bye to, because she supported me through that whole process. But I had to go because I wanted to know what is the truth. I wanted to deepen my spirituality. I shared this with someone recently. He said, so, Justin, it sounds like you put spiritual growth above your ambitions. And I said, yes, that's exactly right. He said, he's known other ministers that they didn't quite put their spirituality above their ambitions. But I was driven by what is the truth. And so I went to Ananda Village and was there for 3.5 years. But during that time, I felt this urge to start teaching and speaking again. So I started to share what I was learning as a Unity minister and also what I was learning about Yogananda in Northern California. And I wanted to also start to maybe speak in corporations and bring principles to them as well. But at one point I was struggling. How am I going to make this happen? I was in Sacramento at that point. I'd moved out of Ananda Village and was in Sacramento. And one day, as I was struggling, how am I going to make this happen? And I was doing what I could. I got a call from Eric and Olga Butterworth in New York City, and their associate was no longer here, and they said, would you come out and be my assistant? And I shared the story with you recently, so I won't go into that. But I was here, with Eric for 4 years. The last 4 years was Life as Ministry, and another year, and then I went to Hilton Head Island. But you see, I was like Ruth. I was gathering spiritual nuggets bit by bit. I was gathering the truth through a journey, a process. And then when I went to Hilton Head Island, I was gathering experience, and being here in New York City, I was gathering experience of what is it like to be a minister. What is it like to be a minister? And I have to say, even though I resisted being a minister, I have grown a lot from being a minister. I've grown spiritually being a minister. I've learned a lot of stuff I never would have learned otherwise. How to be a business person, how to be a leader, how to do administrative stuff. I was never interested in that kind of stuff. Even being a teacher, I never saw myself as a teacher. And I was gathering bit by bit along the way. And then, of course, when the position opened here in New York City, I applied for it and came back to New York City. But now I came back as a different person, someone who had grown in consciousness. And that's the story of Ruth. You see, Ruth, the first millionairess, is actually not in Genesis. Surprise. She's not in Genesis, but Catherine Ponder includes her in her Millionaires of Genesis because there's uncertainty about when the book was written, when her story took place. It probably took place earlier than where it is. The book of Ruth, which follows the book of Judges, but her story probably took place earlier, and she fits with the Millionaires of Genesis because she's the first millionairess who earned her way through spiritual principles and made herself a millionaire. The other millionairesses, they basically, the men, Abraham, earned the stuff, and they were their wives and spouses. Although, they had a big part in supporting their husbands and earning that wealth. But Ruth is really the first one who became a millionairess on her own. You got Eve, of course, but she's an allegorical millionairess. She represents the feeling nature, but the problem is she got involved in limitation, and she was born rich, but then became poor. Ruth was poor and became rich. Ruth went from poverty to wealth by practicing spiritual principles. She was lifted up higher through her practice of principles. And so by looking at Ruth, we can learn about how do we gather our good bit by bit and grow and let love lift us to a higher place. How many of you are excited about gathering your good bit by bit and going from where you are to even a higher place? Yeah. So now, interestingly enough, the book of Ruth says a lot about Naomi. Naomi is a big character in there. The book of Ruth is a love story. How many of you have read the book of Ruth? Not a whole lot of you. Not a whole lot. You're going to learn about it now. The book of Ruth, there was a lady named Naomi. Naomi had a husband, and she had 2 sons who were both married. And they were living in Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of bread. Bread represents substance, the living energy of God, the source of all good. When you think about the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Right? Bread, substance. Give us it. Out of the, Jesus talks about, ye shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that flows out of the mouth of God. In other words, the mouth of God being the medulla at the base of the skull, through which the living energy or substance of God flows into us, energizing us, nourishing us, nurturing us. And you can't live by the outer bread alone, but by the substance. So Bethlehem, house of bread, represents the living energy, the substance of God. So Naomi was with her husband living in Bethlehem, and they had a prosperity consciousness. The problem is they began to perceive the appearance of limitation. they started to see lack. It says there was famine in the land. And instead of sticking with their prosperity principles, oh no, they gave up on their prosperity principles and said, well, things look more prosperous in the land of Moab. Let's go there. Let's go to Moab, which represents material thinking. So they gave up in a time of stress. They gave up on their prosperity thinking, and they moved into material thinking, and they began to try to force their good. How many of us, under stress, under fear, forget our prosperity principles and start to act out of limiting false beliefs and try to force our good? You ever tried to do that? I had a friend named Susan who lived here in New York City, lived right in that beautiful building on the corner. Very successful lady. She was a very, all of her friends, she was elegant. She used to come to Unity. You might have seen her. Very elegant lady. And she shared with me one time, she passed away a couple of years ago. We were friends for 20-some years. And she shared with me one time that in the downtime when the economy turned down, she was concerned. She was fearful about her money, what to do with her money. And she knew a woman billionaire. She went to the billionaire and asked her, what should I do with my investment? And the billionaire suggested that she sell it. And so Susan sold that investment. And then guess what? It went up. She said, I lost so much money, Justin. I was going to retire with that money. I lost so much money, Justin, and you know what? I did not even pray before I made that decision. Her prosperity principles kind of went out the window there for a moment. She didn't even pray. And there's a lesson for us. Naomi and her husband were in a famine, and they went from prosperity thinking to making God as their source, to praying, to handling everything in prayer, to acting on fear. And they went to the land of Moab, which represents lack thinking. It represents living hardship thinking. And there, Naomi's husband died and her 2 sons died. So the lesson there is to remember to keep God as our source, to act from our guidance, to try to take a pause when we're stressed out, when there's the appearance of limitation. Jesus said, judge not by appearances, but judge righteous judgment. Whether it's about a relationship, whether it's about finances, whether it's about a move we want to make, whether it's about a career decision, whatever it is, to take time to get still and quiet and to seek God's guidance and to know God is the source. You can do that. I can do that. We can remember that. Sometimes we forget, and we got to forgive ourselves, but that's what we learn from Naomi and their choice. So they go to the land of Moab. Her son and husband die. And now she's got 2 daughter-in-laws. One is Ruth. One is Orpah. Orpah, who loves appearances. Orpah loves the outer stuff. So she stays in the land of Moab. Ruth, however, loves the mental and the spiritual stuff. How many of you love the mental and the spiritual stuff? She had a mental and a spiritual consciousness, so she wanted to go with Naomi back to Bethlehem. Prosperity thinking. So they went back to Bethlehem, but they were still broke. And I'm reminded of a man who said something pretty powerful. I have to check my sheet out here. Mike Todd said, there's been many times when I've been broke, but I've never been poor. How many of you know that? Your bank account might be low, but you know who your source is. Right? Your health might be challenged, but you know who your healing power is. You might be having a challenge at work or in a relationship, but you know who the source of your love is. God is. God's the source of the love. Well, that's where they were. They went back to Bethlehem, and they started to continue to practice their prosperity principles. They returned to a prosperous level of thinking. You see, the problem with Naomi, she was trying to force things to happen. And that doesn't work because it's dealing with the physical energy. And as Ponder points out, physical energy is a lower, slower vibration than mental, spiritual energy. Physical energy is meant to be an instrument, a channel for the expression of that higher vibration of spiritual energy. In fact, Catherine says this. She says, you must learn to think things through rather than trying to force things through. When you deliberately employ prosperous thinking, your prosperity thoughts move on the lavish substance of the universe, manifesting it as rich ideas and as increased supply in your life in any number of ways. Your prosperous thinking develops the rich state of mind known as Bethlehem. When you try to force things through in an outer way and panic at every sign of lack, your hardships just multiply. This develops the limited hardship consciousness known as Moab. So they go back to Bethlehem, and they get back to those prosperity thought process, those prosperity practices, making God first in their life, putting God as their source. And Ruth starts to do what she can where she is. That's what we've got to do. We've got to take what we have and bloom where we're planted, right? And that's what Ruth did. She took what she had and she started to bloom where she was planted. She went to a field of harvest. She was guided to go to a field of harvest, and she started to gather the grains of barley and wheat that the reapers were leaving behind. Apparently, in those ancient days, the Hebrews would reap the harvest, but they would help the poor by leaving some sheaves behind. And so that's what Ruth did. She gathered the grain, and it says that she worked from morning till night. All day long, she gathered the grain, and she persisted in applying her abundance mentality. She persisted in knowing God is my source, and I am grateful for the good that is here, and she gathered her good bit by bit. How many of you are aware of good that's in your life right now? How many of you are acknowledging the good that's in your life right now? That's gathering your good. How many of you are learning from the experiences where you are right now? It may not be where you want to be forever. It may not be where you want it to stay, but it's where you are, and you're making the best of it right now. And that is prosperous thinking. That's applying your prosperity mindset to where you are in a practical way. And that expresses in our life. If you're looking for somebody to rent your home, then God can meet you with that person who wants to rent that home or buy that home. If you're looking for a place to live, God can help you find that place to live. If you're looking for a place to serve and make a difference and share your talents in a way that's meaningful, God can match you up for that place, or God can show you how to create that for yourself. It will happen as we put God first and on a daily basis begin to remember to affirm and to pray and to visualize the good that we want to experience in our life. And that's what Ruth did. She was guided to that field. And you know who owned that field? Boaz owned that field. Boaz. You want to say that? I like that sound of that name. Boaz. Come on, join me. 1, 2, 3. Boaz owned that field. And Boaz was a millionaire. Boaz symbolically represents prosperity at its best. That's the kind of man Boaz was. Boaz was a humble man. Boaz was a God-centered man. Boaz practiced the power of blessing. It says in the scripture that when he saw the people who worked in the fields, his reapers, he would bless them. He said, God's blessing be with you. And they would bless him back. And may all of God's blessings be with you, Boaz. And when Boaz saw Ruth, he blessed her and said, God is gonna richly prosper you, Ruth. He was a man of blessing. We can be people of blessing. What does it mean to bless? It means to bestow honor or prosperity upon. It means to look beyond the good and see the source of your good. It means to acknowledge that this wonderful body that I have now, you know, we all have a wonderful body. It may not look the way we want it to look necessarily. It may not be the shape we'd like it to ultimately be. It may have a few aches and pains or something like that, but it is a body, and you are in it. And if you stop comparing your body to everybody else's body, then you can really appreciate this body because it is a miracle, isn't it? This body is a wonder, ladies and gentlemen. God is being your body. Your body is part of God. This body is God's substance. And so we bless our body, acknowledging, wow, I am so grateful for this body. I am grateful for I bless the heart. I bless my kidneys. I bless every part of this body. It is God's body. And we begin to acknowledge the blessings in our life. Bless what's in your life now. That is uplifting our consciousness. Bless the good that you want in your life. Send a blessing and welcome the good that you want in your life. What is the good you want to see flow into your life? Welcome it into your life. Bless the good. Make a list of the things you'd like to see show up in your life and welcome them and bless them ahead of time. And then we can bless our past. Are there any hurts in your past? Are there any regrets in your past? Are there any failures in your past? Perceived failures? Send those a blessing. Bless them and acknowledge the growth you've made because of them. Bless the people who have been hurtful in your life. Bless the people who were jealous of you. Bless the people who cheated on you. Bless the people that brought pain into your life. Bless them because they know not what they do, and bless them so you can free yourself. So you can raise your consciousness higher than the old hurts and feelings of pain. Be a person of blessing like Boaz. And guess what happened? Because here was Ruth gathering her good in a humble way. Here was Ruth who had a prosperity consciousness, who was persistent and strong and grateful for her life, who was grateful doing the work that was ahead of her, who was broke but she was not poor, who didn't have a whole lot in her life materially, but she had a lot in consciousness. He noticed her. And he was interested in her. And Naomi, who went from being bitter to now developing a prosperity consciousness, she saw that. And she realized, wow, God has guided Ruth Out of all the fields that she could work in, she was there with Boaz. And she thought, what can I do to get Ruth and Boaz together? And she remembered a Hebrew law. First of all, she remembered Boaz is a relative of hers. And there was a Hebrew law back in those days that if someone lost their husband, that it was where they would marry a relative of the husband. And it was the responsibility of the relative to help, support, and protect that person. And when Naomi saw there was a connection between the two, she sent Ruth to Boaz, and Boaz, being the man that he was, he wanted to do, first of all, he liked Ruth. And secondly, he wanted to fulfill what was his spiritual duty. And so they got married. And Ruth became a millionaire, the first millionairess, in a traditional way. But she had practiced her principles. She was rich in spirit before she ever met Boaz. She was practicing her prosperity principles, living in awareness of the good in her life, and doing what was hers to do. And the result was she became the Bible's first millionairess. And Naomi eventually moved in the house with Ruth and Boaz, and they had a son. Ruth and Boaz had a son. And that son became the grandfather of King David in the lineage of Jesus the Christ. So you see, Naomi had made the mistake of forgetting her prosperity principles and trying to force and make things happen in her life. And when she did that, she ended up in the land of Moab, where things went from bad to worse. And then she rose up like the prodigal son. I will return to my father, the prodigal son said, in the pig pen. Let me return to my father's house. And that's what Naomi did. And Ruth went with her back to Bethlehem and started to make God is my source. No matter what the appearances of things are in my life, God is my source. And I will rely on God to provide for me. And that's the consciousness they took. And they began to daily practice prayer and affirmation and visualization and knowing God as their source and doing what they could right where they were to develop their prosperity consciousness, to gather their good bit by bit. And you and I can do the same. That's been my experience and my journey, is to seek first the kingdom of God, to gather spiritual nuggets bit by bit, and to embrace the work that was in front of me bit by bit, and to go through the sorrows of life, which is what they went through. There's a lot of sorrow. Naomi lost her husband and her 2 sons. Ruth lost her husband, but they maintained their faith through the sorrow. When you experience sorrow, it can expand your soul. It can expand your understanding. Khalil Gibran said, pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. So if you're going through a challenge like that, it can expand who you are. It can help you to grow and embrace your good. So we've got an affirmation for you today that you can use. We're putting it in the chat, and you're going to receive a laminated affirmation today to work with this coming week so that you can develop this prosperity yourself. Can we put that up on the screen, the affirmation that we have today? So I invite you to stand up with me now, and let's acknowledge this for ourselves. A lesson from Ruth. So please join me in reading this. As I practice blessing those people, things, or events which have hurt or disappointed me, or the failures that have burdened me, an unlimited blessing can still come out of it all. Pain can still bring gain as I quietly and uncomplainingly begin to collect my good bit by bit. It increases. This leads to prosperity at its best. You and I, as we gather bit by bit, we can experience our own Boaz, prosperity at its best. So I'd like to say that no matter how much good is in your life today, there is greater good to experience. No matter how little there may appear to be, there is greater good for you to experience. Wherever you are in your life, you have yet to experience prosperity at its best. So let's keep on keeping on. And as the psalmist, this could apply to Ruth in verse 126, verse 6. He that goes forth and weepeth, bearing seed for sowing, shall doubtless come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Thank you, Father, Mother God, for your guidance to us through the wonderful parable and story of Ruth and Naomi, reminding us that as we embrace what faces us and what we face in life, the challenges, the sorrows, that we grow and expand, that as we continue to put you first in our lives, our prosperity will continue to grow. Our abundance will continue to grow. And we will grow stronger, we will grow more joyful, we will grow more loving, and our life will be uplifted in every way. This is the promise, this is the truth that makes us free. And so it is. Amen. All right. Let's all give a special thank you to Bobby Harden and Etienne Little. Thank you so much. And please, please join us down below, downstairs, if you're here in the space, for coffee, tea, and snacks. If you'd like to interact, there's a prayer gathering right after this service is over with Justin Morley. It'll be a brief prayer time. And then for those of you who have been initiated into Kriya, I'm going to do a special session for you at 1 o'clock. If you're watching online and you've been initiated through Kriya, you received an email, and in that email there's a link to join us by Zoom at 1 o'clock. All right? So we'll see you then for that. Please join us now for the prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Yea, God. Namaste. God bless you.